The night Whitney Houston died, there was a party just floors below her lifeless body. It wasn't just any party, it was the pre-Grammy celebration hosted by the very man who had discovered her, Clive Davis. As Whitney lay in a bathtub upstairs at the Beverly Hilton Hotel, unconscious and beyond help, music, laughter, and champagne flowed freely downstairs. It sounds like a scene from a dark satire, but it was very real, and it begs a question too disturbing to ignore. When does celebration become complicity? Good evening, and welcome to Celeb Shadows, TV, where we uncover the stories behind the spotlight, the ones you were never meant to see. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, because the truth rarely comes wrapped in glitter. Tonight, we delve into the haunting tragedy of Whitney Houston, a voice of a generation, a symbol of talent, success, and ultimately, public unraveling. Whitney's life wasn't just another celebrity downfall. It was the slow-motion collapse of a woman the world refused to let be human. Raised in a gospel family, born to music royalty, Whitney Elizabeth Houston seemed destined for greatness. Her mother, Cissy Houston, a powerful gospel singer. Her cousin, Dionne Warwick. Her godmother, the legendary Aretha Franklin. From church pews to global stages, the trajectory seemed blessed until the world realized that blessings don't protect you from demons. Fame came swiftly. At just 22, she signed with Arista Records, and her debut album exploded. She broke records, topped charts, dominated awards. Her voice, a rare fusion of purity and power. Yet even as the industry applauded, whispers began. She was too polished, too pop for a black woman, too successful to be authentic, too perfect to be real. The backlash hit hardest at the 1989 Soul Train Awards, where the crowd booed her nomination. That moment stayed with her. Publicly adored, yet quietly judged. Then came Bobby Brown, a man who would become both her husband and the embodiment of her unraveling. People paint him as the villain. He wasn't the only one. Their relationship was chaotic. Yes, toxic, certainly. But Whitney wasn't just a victim in that story. According to Bobby's own memoir, he found her using drugs on their wedding day. The illusion of a fairy tale was shattered before the cake was even cut. But the chaos didn't start or end with Brown. Before him, there were whispers of a romance with Jermaine Jackson, a married man. There was Eddie Murphy, who, it said, called her the day of her wedding and begged her not to go through with it. There was Robin Crawford, her childhood friend, her confidant, possibly her great love, whose relationship with Whitney was silenced, hidden, buried beneath the weight of expectations. Being a queer black woman in the 80s, unforgivable to the machine of mainstream fame. And so she adapted, conformed, straightened the edges, became the woman the world wanted, but at what cost? As her fame skyrocketed, her private life disintegrated. 2 miscarriages in silence. One during the filming of The Bodyguard, a career peak, masking personal grief. That iconic poster? The one where Kevin Costner carries her? That's not even Whitney, it's a body double. She was too unwell to shoot. And yet, the world clapped. It's easy to mourn Whitney now, to quote her songs and say we miss her. But back then, she was ridiculed. Tabloids mocked her weight, her addiction, her marriage, her parenting. The same media that profited off her downfall now publishes tributes. And the fans? Many watched her stumble and still demanded a flawless performance the next night. The show must go on even if it kills the star. So tonight, we ask, what truly killed Whitney Houston? Was it addiction? Was it Bobby Brown? Or was it all of us? Stay with us, because we're only just beginning to unpack the layers of this haunting, unforgettable story. What made Whitney's story more painful wasn't just her struggle, it was how public that struggle became. By the late 90s and into the early 2000s, The world was no longer talking about her chart-topping hits or her vocal range that once left audiences breathless. Instead, headlines focused on delays, cancellations, and disheveled appearances. It was as though the music industry and the public at large had shifted their gaze from admiration to voyeurism. People weren't watching her perform anymore, they were watching her spiral. During her My Love Is Your Love world tour in 1999, something had changed. Audiences noticed it. Promoters talked about it. She arrived late to shows, or sometimes failed to appear at all. Her once impeccable stage presence started to show cracks. Whispers of substance abuse intensified. Still, no one close to hear her in the media seemed ready to step in meaningfully. It was easier, perhaps more profitable, to watch the train derail than to try and stop it. Behind the scenes, Whitney's world was unraveling. Her marriage to Bobby Brown had moved beyond dysfunction. There were arrests, domestic violence charges, public spats captured on camera. Bobby's reality show, Being Bobby Brown, turned their lives into a chaotic spectacle, exposing moments that should never have been public. Yet people tuned in week after week, fascinated by the mess, as if the unraveling of two lives was just another form of entertainment. That reality show, though short-lived, gave the world a front-row seat to Whitney's lowest points. She herself would later call it a train wreck. She looked thin, erratic, sometimes incoherent. Her voice, once considered a gift from God, was visibly deteriorating. And perhaps most tragically, her spirit looked dimmer with each passing frame. Still, the cameras rolled. Still, the audience applauded. Still, the media pushed more. There's something almost cruel in how society handles icons like Whitney. When she was at the top, she was America's sweetheart. When she stumbled, she became tabloid prey. And when she cracked under the pressure, it was treated as spectacle. Rarely did people ask, why is this happening? What's behind this decline? How do we help? Not those were questions reserved for private citizens. For celebrities, pain is public property. And that pain was deeply rooted, not just in fame or marriage or addiction, but in something far more damaging, unhealed trauma. Years after her death, documentaries and close friends began to speak more openly. Whitney had reportedly been molested as a child by a family member, a secret she had buried for years. That kind of violation changes a person. It echoes through their choices, their relationships, their self-worth. It plants a seed of silence that can grow into a lifetime of shame and secrecy. And in Whitney's case, that silence grew into a storm. The loss of her daughter, Bobby Christina, in 2015 only deepened the tragedy. Found unconscious in a bathtub eerily similar to her mother, Bobby Christina lingered in a coma for months before passing away. She was just 22. Her life, too, had been shaped by media scrutiny, substance use, unstable relationships. And again, the public watched. Again, the headlines dissected. Again, another chapter ended in sorrow. What are we supposed to make of this? Two lives, mother and daughter, paralleling each other in despair. Both gone far too soon. Both icons, in a sense, of how fame can elevate and then destroy. And in between the applause and the awards, the red carpets and reality TV, what was left? A woman who wanted peace. A daughter who wanted her mother. A family line haunted by grief. People often ask if Bobby Brown should be blamed. He certainly played a part. The violence, the drugs, the chow, she admits to much of it. But to lay it all at his feet is to ignore the broader system that enabled and even fed off Whitney's decline. The executives who booked her tours even when she clearly wasn't well. The publicists who spun disaster into PR. The paparazzi who made fortunes snapping pictures of her lowest moments. And yes, us, the viewers, the fans, the consumers who watched it all unfold like a slow-motion car crash, we couldn't look away from. The better question might be, how did we let it happen? Whitney Houston wasn't just another troubled celebrity. She was a cultural mirror reflecting how society builds up women, especially black women, into impossible ideals, only to punish them when they inevitably fall short. She had to be perfect, beautiful, talented, polished, straight, sober, smiling, always grateful. And when she failed to be all those things at once, the world turned on her. So we ask again, not as fans or critics, but as people, did Whitney Houston ever really stand a chance? Picking up from that painful question, did Whitney Houston ever really stand a chance? We start to see how narrow the path was for her from the very beginning. It wasn't just a story of fame or addiction. It was a story of impossible expectations, of a woman built into a brand and boxed into an image she didn't design. Every move she made was scrutinized, every relationship questioned, every human misstep magnified. Take her image, for instance. Whitney wasn't just promoted as a singer, she was crafted into the ideal of American black excellence. Clean-cut, God-fearing, glamorous, and non-threatening. This wasn't a natural progression of her identity, it was industry-mandated packaging. Her crossover success was heavily curated, often at the cost of her authenticity. When critics accused her of selling out, what they really meant was, she made white audiences comfortable. And for that, she paid a hidden tax: the slow erosion of self. The reality is, Whitney had been caught in a double bind from the start. Be too polished, and you're not real enough. Be too raw, and you're a liability. Be successful, and you're envied. Struggle publicly, and you're mocked. In a culture obsessed with perfection, yet addicted to scandal, she was destined to lose. And while her talent was undeniable, it became both her blessing and her curse. She set the bar so high, even she struggled to reach it again. As her voice faltered in later years, whether from exhaustion, substance use, or emotional strain, people didn't offer grace. They asked what happened to her, as if they weren't part of what happened. Even her most triumphant moments were shadowed by pain. The Bodyguard, her iconic film debut, should have been a crowning jewel. It became her best-selling era, bolstered by I Will Always Love You, a track that shattered records. But behind the scenes, she suffered a miscarriage and pushed through filming anyway. And that voice soaring, angelic, was masking heartbreak. The film's producers even hesitated to feature her in the marketing, afraid that an interracial love story would hurt box office performance. So in the trailer, she was barely seen. That poster of Kevin Costner carrying her, it wasn't even her body. She was too physically unwell to film the scene. A symbol of success that, once again, erased the woman at the center of it. Her personal life offered no sanctuary either. As her fame intensified, Bobby Brown's resentment reportedly grew. He struggled with her success, with being Mr. Houston, with playing second fiddle in a world that once idolized him as a bad boy R&B star. The jealousy reportedly spilled over into their marriage, creating a vicious cycle of control, infidelity, and substance use. He admitted to cheating. He admitted to violence. But even then, Whitney defended him. Perhaps because defending him meant holding on to a version of herself that still believed in love. Or perhaps because the world had already blamed her for so much. She didn't want to offer it more. It's easy to say Whitney made bad choices. But the harder truth is, she had few real choices to begin with. The ecosystem around her, managers, record labels, handlers, was designed to extract, not protect. So long as she performed, so long as she could walk on stage and belt out a ballad, no one asked what was happening when the lights dimmed. And when she did try to step back, to regroup, to enter treatment, the headlines didn't applaud, they scoffed. Stories weren't about her courage to recover, but about her comeback attempts, often written with thinly veiled cynicism. She became a punchline, a meme before memes existed. People would mimic her slurred speech in interviews, her erratic behavior in public. Late-night hosts joked, tabloids cashed in, and no one stopped to ask what kind of pain she was living with. Even in her later years, when she showed glimpses of reclaiming herself, returning to music, seeking help, there was a sense that it might never be enough. Not for the industry, not for the media, not for the public who had already decided what version of Whitney they wanted to remember, the flawless, smiling superstar of 1987. But Whitney Houston of 2011, the woman trying to find peace, to hold on to sobriety, to rebuild something for herself and her daughter, that version didn't sell records. That version didn't fill stadiums. That version didn't get celebrated. She got sidelined. That's the deeper tragedy here. That we loved her most when she was most unreal. And when she became real, vulnerable, flawed, human, we looked away. Or worse, we laughed. As her final years approached, Whitney still held on to faith. According to those closest to her, she wanted to get better. She wanted to be well. In one of her final conversations, she reportedly told her assistant Mary Jones that she hoped God would take her to a place of peace. That moment is devastating, not just because of what it reveals about her despair, but because it shows that even at the end, Whitney Houston was still reaching for grace. But grace, in the world she lived in, came too late. The story of Whitney Houston's final days isn't just a tragic ending, it's a mirror held up to the entertainment world and to us. In the days leading up to her death, those around her described her as exhausted, jittery, yet hopeful. She had recently checked herself into rehab once again, reportedly trying to maintain sobriety. She was preparing for a comeback, trying to prove she still had something left to give. She had just performed at a pre-Grammy party and was scheduled to attend another that weekend. But what exactly happened inside that hotel suite on February 11th, 2012, remains murky. What we do know is this: she was found unconscious in the bathtub. Prescription drugs were nearby. The official cause of death was ruled as accidental drowning, complicated by heart disease and the effects of cocaine and other substances. But those are clinical terms. They don't capture the years of damage, the mental strain, the emotional war she had been fighting long before that night. What made it more disturbing was how quickly the industry seemed to move on. Clive Davis, the same man who discovered her, went forward with his pre-Grammy party at the same hotel, just hours after her body was found upstairs. His justification? That Whitney would have wanted the show to go on. Perhaps that's true. But perhaps it also speaks volumes about how show business prioritizes image over humanity, legacy over life. It's a chilling image: music playing below, lights glowing, wine flowing while on an upper floor. One of the greatest voices of all time lay still. To some, this moment crystallized everything wrong with the industry's relationship with its stars. Whitney wasn't just a person anymore, she had become property, a brand, a spectacle. And even in death, the wheels of that machine didn't stop turning. In fact, her death boosted sales. Streams surged. Albums flew off shelves. She was more profitable in death than she had been in years. And that says something uncomfortable. Sometimes, we love our stars more when they're no longer alive to disappoint us. In the days that followed, tributes poured in. Celebrities spoke. Old friends gave interviews. The Grammy Awards turned into a night of mourning. But amid the condolences was an unmistakable hypocrisy. Some of the same outlets that had mocked her most viciously now praised her as a legend gone too soon. It was a cycle, one we've seen before. And sadly, since, praise in death becomes the currency to cleanse guilt in life. But the damage had already been done, especially to the one person left to carry it: her daughter, Bobby Christina Brown. At just 18, Bobby Christina was thrust into the spotlight not as a celebrity, but as a symbol of legacy and loss. The pressure was immediate, the expectations brutal, and like her mother, she too struggled with substance use, unstable relationships, and relentless media attention. She had barely begun to live before her life started unraveling in public. When she was found face down in a bathtub in 2015, nearly mirroring the death of her mother, the parallels were too eerie to ignore. She spent 6 months in a medically induced coma before passing away at the age of 22. And with that, an entire bloodline of women in pain 2 generations was gone. Her boyfriend, Nick Gordon, was rumored to be abusive, manipulative, and possibly involved in the circumstances that led to her collapse. He was later found liable in a civil case regarding her death. But beyond the legalities was a larger question. Why was no one able to stop the cycle? Why, after watching Whitney fall, did no one step in to catch her daughter? Maybe because the machine doesn't stop. Maybe because redemption stories sell, but only after tragedy. Maybe because once someone's been labeled as damaged, we treat them like they're disposable. We say we want healing, but we rarely invest in it. And this raises an even more painful truth. Whitney and Bobby Christina were not isolated cases. They are part of a larger pattern, a well-worn narrative in pop culture where Black women, in particular, are expected to carry the weight of resilience, talent, and representation, all while being denied softness, safety, or second chances. When they falter, they're not ridiculed. Think of how often Black women in the industry are expected to be invincible. There is no space for fragility, no grace for struggle. Whitney was told to smile when she was dying inside. Bobby Christina was expected to thrive while still grieving. And when both slipped through the cracks, the world barely blinked. Because it had already seen that show before, and once you've seen enough pain, it becomes normalized. So we return to that hotel room, to that bathtub, to the silence that followed. And we ask, how many warning signs did the world need? How loud did Whitney have to scream before someone listened? Because the truth is, her screams weren't always verbal. Sometimes, they were missed tour dates. Sometimes, they were shaky interviews. Sometimes, they were pleas wrapped in song lyrics. But they were there. We just didn't want to hear them. What makes Whitney Houston's legacy even more complex is how her story continues to echo not just in music, but in the uncomfortable truths it forces us to confront. As we piece together the events of her life and the choices made around her, we begin to see a pattern that extends far beyond one woman, or even one industry. This isn't just about what happened to Whitney, it's about how an entire system works to build icons, only to abandon them the moment they show signs of real human struggle. There's something insidious about the way celebrity culture turns vulnerability into spectacle. Whitney didn't just lose her way in private. Every fall, every relapse, every off-key note, every canceled show each became a headline. Her missteps weren't treated as cries for help, but as entertainment. The very system that profited from her perfection profited even more from her imperfections. And this cultural impulse isn't limited to Whitney. Consider how many other artists, especially Black women, have been dehumanized in similar ways. Their pain is dissected for page views. Their breakdowns are meme-worthy. Their trauma becomes clickbait. And when they disappear or die young, we act surprised, as if the outcome wasn't foreshadowed in every cruel punchline and every invasive headline. Whitney's daughter wasn't spared either. Bobby Christina became tabloid fodder almost the moment her mother died. Instead of being protected, she was pushed further into a spotlight she never asked for. Photos of her looking distressed, rumors about her personal life, stories about her relationship with Nick Gordon all circulated freely. There was no public shielding, no media restraint. Once again, pain became performance. and privacy was stripped away. Even after her passing, the public obsession didn't stop. Graphic images from Whitney's hotel room were leaked. Details about her final moments were splashed across magazine covers. These weren't just lapses in taste, they were violations. And they raise a hard question. When do we stop consuming someone's tragedy as content? It's easy to think of this as a media problem, but the media responds to demand. And demand comes from us. We click, we share, we comment, and in doing so, we create the marketplace for human suffering. We say we want to understand celebrities, but often what we really want is access raw, messy, and censored. We want the highs and the lows, and we want them instantly. But what we rarely offer in return is empathy. Whitney Houston wasn't just an icon, she was a person, a daughter, a mother, a friend, someone with fears, traumas, and dreams. But at some point, she stopped being seen as a person and started being seen as a product. Her music was sold, her story was monetized, and her struggles were consumed. And through it all, few asked what she needed. Fewer still listened when she tried to answer. Think about the resources that were poured into her career: production teams, marketing campaigns, international tours, endorsement deals. Now compare that to the resources she received for her mental health, her addiction recovery, her personal healing. The imbalance is staggering. The industry she helped define offered her millions in opportunity, but what did it offer her when she was drowning? And then there's the silence. The people who knew she was struggling, the colleagues who witnessed the warning signs, the executives who saw the decline but did nothing to stop it. Silence is complicity. And in Whitney's case, silence surrounded her until the very end. Some may argue they were protecting her privacy. Others may say it wasn't their place. But when someone is visibly suffering for years on end, "not my place" becomes a hollow excuse. There's also the matter of the narrative. Whitney was frequently reduced to a caricature, the diva who lost it all, the addict who threw it away. But those labels ignore the structural forces at play. The racism, the misogyny, the homophobia, the relentless pressure to be perfect in a world that punishes imperfectionists, especially in Black women. These weren't background details. They were central to the story. Even her relationship with Robin Crawford, formative, possibly romantic bond, was erased from public view for decades. Industry advisors reportedly warned her that being associated with a woman would ruin her career. So, she distanced herself, denied it, buried it, and in doing so, buried a part of herself. Imagine the psychological cost of not just losing love, but being told that love itself was a threat to your success. Years later, when Robin revealed the truth, many fans expressed sympathy. But the industry that demanded the silence, it never apologized. It simply moved on, as it always does, smoothing the narrative, sanding down the rough edges, and packaging Whitney's life into a posthumous myth. And yet, the myth still doesn't sit right. Because deep down, we know there's something unresolved, something unhealed. Whitney's story didn't end because of a single mistake or a single person. It ended because too many people looked the other way. Because too many systems were built to exploit, not support. Because too many fans forgot that brilliance doesn't make someone invincible. In the end, Whitney Houston gave us her voice, her presence, her legacy. The question is, what did we give her in return? If Whitney Houston's story leaves us unsettled, maybe that's the point. Maybe the discomfort we feel is a signal, one that urges us to stop viewing her legacy through the polished lens of nostalgia, and instead confront the raw, painful reality of what her life became. Because to truly honor someone, we have to be willing to see the full picture, not just the music videos, the award speeches, or the glamour of red carpets, but the silence between performances, the exhaustion, the fear, the inner battles she fought quietly, while smiling for the cameras. Her legacy now lives in a strange duality. On one side, there's the reverence, the tributes, the posthumous honors, the biopics, and remastered releases. On the other, there's the uncomfortable question of why we only seem to celebrate someone's humanity after it's too late to help them carry it. Whitney didn't need to be immortalized. She needed to be believed. She needed to be protected. And more than anything, she needed space to fall apart without being torn apart in the process. When we look back at the media landscape during her lifetime, it's hard not to see a pattern of cruelty. The framing was rarely compassionate. She wasn't portrayed as a person in pain. She was portrayed as a punchline, a diva gone wrong. Late-night jokes weren't about her well-being. They were about her public unraveling. Tabloids didn't ask how she was doing, they asked what kind of spectacle she might deliver next. And yet, Whitney kept trying. That's something often lost in the narrative. She didn't give up on herself. She entered rehab multiple times. She returned to the stage. She worked on new music. She showed up sometimes strong, sometimes shaky, but she showed up. That kind of resilience deserves more attention than the moment she stumbled. But our culture rarely rewards resilience unless it comes with a perfect bow at the end. There's also a spiritual weight to Whitney's story. Raised in the church, surrounded by gospel music, she often turned to faith in her lyrics and in her life. Songs like "I Look to You" weren't just performances, they were prayers. And when she told her assistant Mary Jones, just hours before her death, that she was tired and wanted to go home to God, it wasn't a throwaway line. It was a moment of emotional truth. A confession not of weakness, but of weariness, of a soul that had been carrying far too much, for far too long. And maybe that's the most sobering part of all. Whitney's decline wasn't sudden. It wasn't unpredictable. It was public. It was prolonged. And yet, it was allowed to continue. This wasn't the story of someone who disappeared from view and quietly lost a battle. It was the story of someone who lost that battle in front of millions of people, many of whom claimed to love her. So what now? Do we continue to treat tragedies like Whitney's as isolated events? Or do we finally begin to acknowledge the structures that contribute to them, the profit-driven entertainment machine, the brutal pressures of fame, the racial and gender biases, the cultural addiction to scandal? Because until we do, we're not learning. We're repeating. Whitney's story also reminds us that the most talented among us are often the most vulnerable. Their gift doesn't shield them from trauma, it often makes them more susceptible to it. Sensitivity is often the engine of creativity, but also the gateway to suffering. When we forget that, we begin to expect the impossible. We expect brilliance without burnout, perfection without pain, success without sacrifice. And when that fantasy falls apart, we blame the person rather than the expectations placed upon them. And as for the industry, it's easy for executives to pay tribute after the fact. It's easy for labels to release commemorative box sets and digital exclusives. But it's far harder to build a culture that prioritizes the health and humanity of artists in real time. That requires slowing down. That requires saying no to a tour, to a press run, to a photo shoot when what someone really needs is rest. Not applause, not ratings, just rest. Whitney Houston didn't need to be stronger. She needed those around her to be more attentive, more compassionate, more present. And that's a lesson we can carry forward, not just for the stars we admire, but for the people we know, the ones whose pain isn't broadcast on TV, but who still walk around holding more than they can carry. Because in the end, Whitney's life wasn't just about what she gave you, it's about what we didn't give back. Dignity, privacy, grace, and a safe space to be human. And so, when we listen to her voice now clear, soaring, heartbreakingly powerful, it isn't just nostalgia we feel. It's the echo of someone who gave everything. Someone who asked, in her own way, to be seen, and someone who, perhaps, never stopped hoping that one day she truly would be. So maybe the tragedy of Whitney Houston isn't just that she died too young. Maybe the real tragedy is that we saw it coming and still let it happen. She didn't vanish into silence. She sang through the pain. She stumbled in public. She cried out in ways we all recognized, yet pretended not to understand. And when she finally disappeared from the stage forever, the applause came too late. Now we remember her voice, her beauty, her grace. But do we remember the warnings? The moments when her smile was a mask? The times she asked for help without saying a word? And if we don't, what does that say about us? In the end, this isn't just a story about a fallen star. It's about the systems we uphold, the pain we normalize, the people we claim to love but don't protect. Whitney Houston lived a life that gave joy to millions. But the question lingers, did we ever make space for her to simply live? Thank you for staying with us until the end. And if this story stirred something in you, if you believe that truth deserves to be heard, not hidden, then don't just watch. Subscribe to Celeb Shadows TV so you never miss the truths they tried to bury. We'll see you next time.